Now it says live. Welcome! Today we're hosting a Google Hangout with Mission 31's Fabien Cousteau and a team of coral reef experts from the Nature Conservancy. We're waiting for Fabien to log on, and he'll be joining us in just a moment. And today we're going to be discussing why coral reefs are so vital to the people and health of our oceans. So I'll start off by introducing our team from the Nature Conservancy. I'm Dr. Christine Shepard. I'm the Director of Science for the Gulf of Mexico program at the Conservancy, and I study nature-based approaches such as coral reef restoration for reducing impacts of storms and sea level rise to coastal communities. With me are two of my colleagues, Kemit-Amon, our Coral Restoration Strategy Lead for the Caribbean Program and Coordinator for a Reef-Responsible Sustainable Seafood Initiative in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Kemit?
Hey, how you doing?
All right. Hey, Kemit. And we have Caitlin Lustig, our scientist in the Florida Keys, managing coral restoration and monitoring coral stress events such as bleaching, disease, and mortality. Hey, Caitlin.
Hi.
So the Nature Conservancy has been working for more than 60 years to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And coral reefs play a major role in the health of our oceans. From Palau in the Pacific to the Florida Keys in the U.S., we're working to protect these vital ecosystems and all the corals, fish, and people that depend on them. Oh, it looks like someone just joined us from Aquarius.
Hi, yes, my name is Liz McGee. I'm standing in for Fabien. He's just taking care of something right now, but he'll be right in.
Okay, perfect. So maybe we could start with Kemit sharing a little bit about your work in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Awesome. So, hi everyone, and I'm glad to be on this really cool Google Hangout with a number of other really cool people. Yeah, I work primarily in the U.S. Virgin Islands, but now throughout the Caribbean. It's a project that was started in 2009, where Caitlin and I first met, starting to really take coral restoration work to scale and learning from a lot of the pilot projects and developing techniques and strategies that can help us get efficiently and effectively to scale. And that's, I think, been the coolest thing about the work that we're doing here. We're learning a lot, and we are helping to advance the field. The Aquapra Restoration Guide is out, that was developed with our team, and we're starting to see some really cool things. So from one or two corals, we now have thousands of corals outplanted on our reefs here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we've recently expanded our nurseries to hold 10,000 corals. So we'll be able to outplant a significant amount of corals each year as we continue this work.
Thanks, Kemit. And can you share with folks where you're broadcasting from today?
I am broadcasting from the island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, my home.
Great, thank you. And Caitlin, if you'd like to share where you're broadcasting from.
Sure. I'm broadcasting from Big Pine Key in the Florida Keys.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
All right, I'd like to introduce our guest, Fabien Cousteau. Fabien is an oceanographic explorer, conservationist, documentary filmmaker, and the grandson of the famous ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. Thank you for joining us today from Aquarius, your underwater home in the Florida Keys for the past 27 days.
Welcome to the bottom of the sea. It's an amazing experience to be down here for a full lunar cycle in the world's only undersea marine laboratory. Sorry I'm a little late. We just got in from a 3.5-hour dive, and we needed to prep some gear for the next excursion, which is happening right now.
Great, no problem. Thank you for joining us. So we were just talking about some of the work that we do in the Conservancy helping to protect coral reefs for the benefit of the nature and people that depend on them. And Caitlin is broadcasting from the Florida Keys herself. So no one has a better view of our coral reefs in the Keys than you right now, Fabien. Can you tell us about your Mission 31 project and what you've seen so far?
Well, we're privileged to be situated in a national marine sanctuary, and within that sanctuary in a fully protected zone, only accessible for scientific research. That said, I've noticed a lot of changes with the coral reefs here. The biodiversity in this protected zone is still very plentiful, but the corals themselves have been degraded, as we all know, obviously, but to an extent that I was a little bit surprised about myself. I've been diving here since my teenage years. I haven't had the privilege of living at saturation for 31 days, so this really gives an unprecedented view of what's happening when we dive 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day on these same reefs. That said, I've also noticed that the sponges are getting more and more abundant in the area and are presumably filling in some of the roles that the corals have been in the past.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. And I heard from a colleague that you recently took a trip to one of our partners' coral restoration nurseries, and I'm curious if you could share with us what the most fascinating aspect of that trip was.
Well, actually, two of my scientists who were borrowed from FIU, Florida International University, went to go visit a good friend of ours at the Coral Restoration Foundation, and we were able to inherit a few of those coral fragments that they normally grow for restoration. And Ken Niedermeyer, who is the head of that nonprofit, has been doing work in the Florida Keys for many, many years. He's been successful at restoring some local areas in terms of the acropora, or the fast-growing corals, as well as some of the slower-growing corals. And of course, experimentation is still going on with his organization and many others around the world. In essence, we don't really know what the future of coral reefs are going to be, especially as it pertains to the things that we're all faced with. Climate change-related issues like acidification, of course, runoff issues, especially fertilizers and certain man-made chemicals, are also culprits in exacerbating the decline of these coral reefs. So some of the things that we're studying with those fragments right here off of Aquarius are those issues, of the pollutant issues, as well as, of course, the dissolved CO2 and O2, as well as pH levels and so on within the coral polyps themselves.
All right, great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And what we're going to do now is, I think in the beginning you might have missed our introductions. So we have Kemit Lewis, our coral restoration strategy in the Caribbean for the Conservancy, and also Caitlin Lustig, our scientist in the Florida Keys, managing coral restoration and monitoring coral stress events, some of which you just described. So we're happy to join you today. And what we're going to do is answer some questions that were generated on our Facebook page and on Twitter, questions that folks have about coral reefs and the work that has been going on to restore them to a healthy status. So the first question is for Kemit. Coral reefs get lots of attention for the biodiversity they harbor, but what are some of the coolest animals that you've seen, Kemit, while working underwater?
So we've had a couple of pretty unique visitors, or volunteers as we'd like to call them. The first was a bottlenose dolphin that would, I think what happened is that he or she observed us cleaning our nurseries, so removing algae from the PVC structures that we use to cover the rebar that anchors the blocks. And so in cases we would pull the PVC up, clean them, and put them back down. And after that event with the dolphin, every time we'd swim into the nursery, all of the PVC sleeves would be off the rebar and on the floor. And we'd have to scurry them up, put them back on. We'd go back out. We'd come back into the site, and of course the PVC are off again and on the floor. And I think the dolphin assumed he was helping us by picking the PVC off of the rebar. And next time we'll put a little bit more effort into showing them how to put the PVC back. And then we have a number of different fish species, the acanthaurids, or the sturgeons, and some of the scarids that will clean the algae off of our nurseries. We're happy to have them there. And so we've actually started to situate our coral structures, coral nursery structures, close to reefs so that the fish will come over and help us out. And then the most unique visitor we've had so far that I've recently blogged about was an octopus that tried to steal one of our recently outplanted corals to take back to his or her den. And it was quite the adventure to get the coral back, the coral and the epoxy back from the octopus and back onto the reef.
Nice, and I've heard there's a video of that floating around on the internet somewhere, so hopefully folks can find that and take a look at that experience that you had. Fabien, would you like to share any interesting sights you've seen on any of your recent dives in the Keys?
Sure, although I don't think I can beat Kemit's stories. That's pretty amazing. I love that. We've had some pretty interesting stories here, not necessarily related to the research itself, but just in casual observation. We've noticed that a couple of the, I'm sorry, I get so distracted with this viewport, and there's always something swimming by, so bear with me during this, I'm sorry. But essentially, we've had some visits from a couple of endangered species, including the Goliath grouper, one of which we call Jacques, or JYC, after my grandfather's initials. He happens to be the big boy around here. He peeks in every time we have dinner and stares at us longingly. I don't know if it's for the space-age freeze-dried food rating or us, but in any event, it's really kind of neat to see an animal that's 6 feet long, 600 pounds, looking in, and then using our lights outside to bait in some of the fish that he ends up eating for dinner himself. Aside from that, we saw one of these Goliath grouper actually strike a barracuda for the very first time, and we happened to be rolling cameras, so that in itself was pretty amazing. I never knew grouper actually attacked barracuda, but apparently they do. So that was pretty neat. And then on the lighter side of things, or maybe the smaller side of things, we saw some Christmas tree worms spawning. I've never seen that myself, so it was just a magical moment to see a whole post encrusted with Christmas tree worms just basically smoldering and smoking in the water column with sperm and egg. I thought that was pretty romantic and pretty special moment. But anyway, lots of little things like that.
All right. So, Caitlin, I have a question for you that came in about bleaching and ocean acidification. And Barbara wants to know, these events are often in the news when we're talking about coral reefs, but she'd like to know about what's going on in the Florida Keys with respect to bleaching and ocean acidification.
Okay, yeah, so bleaching and ocean acidification are both increasing with climate change. So there's something that TNC is really concerned about here in Florida. And with the help of our partners, our Florida Reef Resilience Program monitors coral bleaching every summer. In the past 5 years since I've been here, we haven't really seen, we've seen bleached corals here and there, but we haven't really seen anything significant that would cause concern. We were concerned during the summer of 2010 about bleaching potentially in the coral nurseries. Water temperatures were high and there was a period of very calm weather. And when there's no wind, the surface of the water becomes very calm, and that increases the likelihood of bleaching for the corals. So we actually had a discussion about potentially using sprinklers to create ripples on the surface of the water, or also shading cloths that you can put over the nurseries. Luckily, the water never got warm enough that we actually had to do any of that. But we were discussing different options. And we've also recently started working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to look at how ocean acidification may be affecting our coral nurseries.
Okay, thank you. And the next question we have was directed towards me about, the question is, part of your job is to help people living along coastlines make more informed decisions by developing decision support tools. What exactly are decision support tools, and how do coral reefs figure into them? So part of what we do at the Nature Conservancy is develop these decision support tools to do exactly what they describe, which is support decision making. And we have a variety of tools that we've developed along the coastlines that help folks make informed decisions about restoration, where it makes the most sense to put a restoration project in the water, and also where to put projects when you have a particular goal in mind. So for example, if you'd like to reduce risk to people, what locations make sense in terms of putting an oyster reef into the water or a coral reef into the water. And with respect to coral reefs, we're developing a wave attenuation tool in the Florida Keys, where as part of our coastal resilience decision support tool, the wave attenuation app, the coastal defense app is its name, allows you to propose a future coral reef, a restored, built-up coral reef, and evaluate the wave attenuation that will result from that coral reef. It also helps you understand what increased wave exposure there will be if the reefs are degraded. So simulations like this that are based on real coastal engineering models are really helpful for decision makers in understanding how important it is to keep the coral reefs healthy and vibrant so they can continue to reduce wave energy that's coming to the coastline. So that, in a nutshell, is what decision support tools are. And we have a couple other questions that are more general discussion questions that we're going to move to. So feel free to chime in at any point, Fabien and Caitlin and Kemit. So the first one is Patty D asks that she read that New Orleans has a plan to use empty oyster shells from restaurants to build an offshore reef. Will this work? If so, why didn't we think of this before? So I'll take a stab at that first off, Patty D. So I think it's likely that the projects that you've heard about in the Gulf of Mexico are referring to oyster reefs. And the Nature Conservancy has quite a few projects along the Gulf Coast in each of the 5 Gulf states where we've put oyster reefs back into the water to restore the oyster reef habitat, but also to reduce wave energy hitting the shorelines and help reduce erosion. And so this similar concept is also starting to occur with coral reefs, where we're exploring coral reef restoration to put essentially submerged breakwaters in to reduce the wave energy hitting the coastline. So let's move on to a more tropical-focused question. Anna B. asks, what gives you hope for the future of our reefs and health of our oceans? So anybody like to take
I can certainly chime in on that, just simply because I think that this panel wouldn't be doing what they're doing if they didn't have hope, first of all. I don't presume to be answering for everybody, but I believe that hope is what gets us up in the morning. For me personally, you know, Mission 31 was a hugely difficult endeavor to put into place. I don't really think that under normal circumstances I would have persevered so long to make it happen. And the reason why I did is because I really feel that this is a communal platform to be able to speak to the crux of hope, which is the young people around the world. They are why we have hope, because they know a lot more than we did at their age. The word impossible doesn't exist in their dictionary. And the fact that they come up with new and innovative ideas, new ways or different ways of looking at life and tackling the challenges with such enthusiasm and vibrance really gives me hope that although we are facing a lot of difficult challenges, there are a lot of innovative solutions that are coming out now that they can champion and that we can help them champion. So for me, personally anyway, I go to sleep exhausted every night and I wake up every morning ready to do it all over again because I have great hope, not only in the future of this planet, but as it pertains to young people and the way they're going to champion a much better, healthier planet than we have.
That's awesome. I'll chime in a little bit also. Pretty much just to continue on what was just said. I think a lot of what we're seeing is pretty inspiring, and it gets me excited. A lot of the corals that we work with, the elkhorn and staghorn, the acroporids, we're seeing areas where it seems like they're trying to make a natural recovery, And I think that a lot of the work that we're doing is just going to enhance that natural recovery. I think a lot of the weaker corals are no longer with us, and so what we're working with are the strongest of the strongest. And so we're seeing the increase of survivorship. In fact, we had a huge scare last November as we prepared for the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force meeting here on St. Croix and site visits to our nursery sites because there was bleaching with some of the non-acroprid coral species as far down as 30 meters or so. And I guess the good news is that none of the corals within our nurseries or the corals that were outplanted in our restoration plots were impacted by that bleaching event. So there are a lot of bits and pieces that give me hope, and even beyond that, the concept of a world without reef, a Caribbean without reef, and a St. Croix without reefs is pretty scary. I grew up diving around St. Croix as a member of my high school scuba club, and some of the reefs that we're restoring right now are reefs that I dove as a teenager, and they're doing well. And the same decision support tools that were mentioned earlier, we're incorporating that into our work. And so we're looking for sites that are resilient or that will not be negatively impacted by climate events. And we're focusing a lot of our efforts on those sites, and we're seeing that there is a relationship between the resilience score, the resilience rank of the site, and the restoration success. And so those are the things that really drive me. That and my niece and nephew need to be able to enjoy the things that I enjoyed when I grew up. So I think and by no means do I think the question was asking in a doubtful way, but there is no alternative to what we're doing. The future of the reefs around the Caribbean depend on the work that we're doing, and to that end, we're committed to continuing to do it and continuing to do the best that we can to be successful with the work that we're doing.
Awesome, thanks, Kemit. Caitlin, what gives you hope?
I think sort of the same thing that everyone is saying. I think people are starting to care more. They're starting to understand more about the impacts that we're having on our ocean. And so, when other people care about what it is that we do, that kind of drives us to work harder. We're studying the oceans and we're making meaningful impacts, I think, on the declining reefs here in the Keys and throughout the Caribbean. And, people understanding what we do and wanting us to continue, I think, helps drive us to work even harder at what we do.
We've got to remember that people lead by example, and we need to show the example. And what the Obama administration just did last week was an example of leadership of creating a larger MPA in the Pacific. And these things are of course, all of valuable importance, whether it's on a government level, on a personal level, on a corporate level. It's up to each and every one of us to create these solutions. So in no small part do we all play a role in this. And we just need to remember that our everyday decisions make a very real-world impact, whether we're scientists or someone who goes to work and has a job in accounting or anything. It really does matter. You fill that bucket one drop at a time, and every drop you can put in it is a better future, an investment in this natural resource bank account that we all depend on for our life support system.
Okay, and this next question is for you, Fabien, and it's a nice segue from what you were just saying. What can the average person do, in your opinion, in addition to recycling, to help our reefs?
Well, it's interesting. I've always struggled with these answers because to give simplistic answers on one level is to belittle the tremendous issues that we're facing. But on the other end, there are a lot of very simple solutions that we can implement in our everyday lives that every single person on this planet can. Instead of saying reduce, reuse, recycle, why don't we start with refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle? Because at the end of the day, we use 8 single-use pieces of plastic in our everyday lives at home. in the United States. And these single-use pieces of plastic are built to last 500 years with the material that they're built with, and presumably mostly toxic, and then are discarded within 30 minutes or less of usage. So why don't we try and get rid of some of that flow? This is not a campaign against plastics per se. It's a campaign against being wasteful and polluting. That's really easy, and by the way, it actually saves money in the long run within your own pocketbook. Number two, using a seafood watch guide. When you go to the restaurant, when you go to the supermarket, and really making better decisions in your sea life choices, may make a real world impact as far as those things are concerned as well. And finally, you know, I don't have one with me now, of course. I usually always carry one with me in here, but we have these little devices in our pockets, every single one of us in our pockets. I mean, you could reach all 7 billion people on the planet with this thing. And how amazing is that? Every time we come up from a dive, this is the first time I've been able to do this, but at least on a Cousteau expedition. But here, I have Wi-Fi under the sea. I mean, come on, that's pretty darn cool. And every time we come back from a dive with one of these things, as soon as we break the surface, it automatically beams it up to the web and for everyone to see what we've just seen on the reef. So with that said, you know, a 10-year-old, a 50-year-old, whatever, can talk to someone across the world and try and bond with them on some very pertinent issues or very important issues to themselves. People protect what they love, but how can people protect what they don't understand? And if you can start talking about the things that are important to you, whether it be environment or other, then we can make a real change in life.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Fabien from Mission 31, and also to my colleagues, Caitlin and Kemit. And thank you to everyone who joined our Google Hangout today. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Keep up the great work.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Do the same.
Cheers.